"You're not dying, Eli, stop being dramatic." That was what Sarah Reed said before locking her son in the car. It was one of those dull, cloudy afternoons in suburban Ohio when the sky looked heavy but refused to rain. The silver SUV sat in the parking lot outside a Best Buy store, engine idling, a soft hum against the quiet air. Inside, 15-year-old Eli Reed sat hunched over in the back seat, sweat beading along his pale forehead. His hands pressed tightly against his lower stomach as if he could hold the pain inside. The ache had started hours earlier, during algebra class. At first it was just a sharp sting, manageable, something he thought would fade. But by the time the dismissal bell rang, it had turned into a wildfire spreading through his abdomen, pulsing with every breath. His face was gray, his vision unfocused, and each bump of the road sent waves of agony rolling through him. He had texted the family group chat during class, "Mum, I think something's wrong. I need to go to the hospital." It took 25 minutes before his stepfather, Greg, finally pulled up. The first thing Greg asked wasn't how he felt, but whether he'd been faking sick to skip school. Sarah didn't even turn around. She was busy fixing her lipstick in the visor mirror. Only his little sister, Haley, looked up from her phone long enough to complain that the car's music was too quiet. "Why are you even here?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "We were supposed to go to the mall." "Family bonding day," Sarah muttered. "And now we're running late again." The car rolled past rows of small houses and gas stations. Eli leaned his head against the window, the cool glass his only relief. The pain stabbed deeper, spreading heat through his stomach. His breathing grew shallow. "Mom," he whispered, "it hurts. Please, hospital." Sarah finally looked back at him, eyes narrowing. "You better not be doing this for attention," she said sharply. "You look fine." He wasn't fine. His skin was clammy, his lips pale, and sweat soaked through his gray t-shirt. His pulse raced. He wanted to speak, to beg louder, but his throat felt tight, as if words themselves would shatter him. Then, as if fate were mocking him, Haley gasped, "My phone's dying. It's at 3%. Mum, I need a charger or Ethan's gonna think I'm ignoring him." Sarah sighed, irritation flashing across her face. Through the windshield, a blue Best Buy sign gleamed. "There's one right there," she said. "We'll just stop for a minute." Eli thought he'd misheard. His mind spun in disbelief. "Please, Mum, don't." But Greg was already steering the SUV into the parking lot. The car lurched to a stop. Sarah opened her door without another word, and the cold air rushed in. 5 minutes, she said. "We'll be quick." "Greg, lock the doors." Click. The sound echoed like a verdict through the windshield. Eli watched as his family disappeared into the store, Haley's hair bouncing, Sarah's purse swinging. He pressed his forehead to the window. Every heartbeat sent lightning through his body. Something inside him felt like it was tearing apart, a pressure building until it snapped out outside. His mother compared phone chargers under the fluorescent lights, while his stepfather checked his watch. Bored. Inside the car, a boy silently broke open from the inside out. And in that single, ordinary afternoon, the one his mother thought would only take 5 minutes, Reed's world began to collapse. The ambulance lights blurred into streaks of red and white as the SUV disappeared behind them. For most people, that afternoon would be remembered as a tragedy. For Eli Reed, it was just the day the mask finally cracked, the day the world saw what his family really was. To anyone on the outside, the Reeds looked picture perfect. A 2-story suburban home with a trimmed lawn, a golden retriever named Max, and a mother who volunteered at the school's PTA. Sarah Reed smiled in every photo she posted online, matching outfits, perfect lighting, and captions about family first. But inside that house, silence spoke louder than words. Eli had learned, from a young age, that his mother's love came with conditions. She liked tidy rooms, polite voices, and children who made her look good. Haley, her daughter from her second marriage, fit that mold, easily bright, social, always knowing when to smile. Eli didn't. He looked too much like someone Sarah wanted to forget: his biological father, Michael Carter, the man she divorced when Eli was 3. Michael had been kind but stubborn, the sort of man who questioned everything. Sarah called it defiance. Eli had inherited it. Whenever she looked at him, that resemblance was a wound she couldn't stop reopening. 15. Eli had already learned the quiet rules of their home. Don't interrupt when Greg talks. Don't argue when Mom blames you for something Haley did. Don't mention your dad, ever. Greg, the stepfather, wasn't cruel in the obvious way. He didn't yell often or hit anyone, but his indifference cut sharper than any belt. He treated Eli like a guest who had overstayed his welcome, barely looking at him at dinner, sighing when he spoke, ignoring him unless there was something to criticize. When grades slipped, Greg would mutter, Guess you take after your old man. When Eli stayed quiet, Sarah would snap, "Don't give me that look," just like him. Every word, every glance, was a reminder that he didn't belong at school. Eli kept his head down. He wasn't the kind of kid who made trouble. Teachers called him polite but distant, the boy who always turned in his work but never raised his hand. His only real friend was Dylan, the neighbor who'd known him since kindergarten. They'd bike around the block, talk about video games and homework, normal things that felt like another life compared to what waited at home. Dylan once asked why Eli never invited him over anymore. Eli just shrugged and said his stepdad didn't like guests. He didn't explain that the last time he'd brought Dylan home, Sarah had whispered sharply, "Don't let him see how messy your room is." People judge. She always worried about appearances more than people. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it was daily, ordinary, practiced. On Haley's 15th birthday, she got a used Toyota Corolla wrapped in a red bow. On Eli's, he got a $20 gift card and a reminder to work harder if you want nice things. When Haley caught the flu, Sarah called off work to stay home and make soup. When Eli broke his wrist skateboarding, Greg drove him to urgent care, dropped him off, and waited in the car. They said it was tough love. It felt more like punishment for existing. Still, Eli tried to make peace. He told himself that if he stayed quiet, got good grades, maybe they'd see him differently. Sometimes, he even convinced himself they loved him on those rare, accidental moments when Sarah's voice softened, but it never lasted long. The tension always found a way back, small and sharp. A forgotten chore, a late text, a sigh mistaken for attitude, and beneath it all, an unspoken rule: Haley mattered more. The day before everything happened, the Reed family had planned what Sarah called a bonding weekend. She wanted pictures matching hoodies, pumpkin lattes, the perfect post for her friends to admire. Eli had agreed, mostly out of exhaustion. That morning, when he woke with a dull ache in his stomach, he didn't say a word. He'd been sick before and knew how it went. Sarah accusing him of faking it, Greg rolling his eyes. By lunchtime, the ache turned sharper, but Sarah insisted they stop for groceries and pick up Haley's dress from the mall. He stayed in the back seat, pale and silent, counting the minutes until he could go home. When the pain spread lower, like fire, he texted the only person he thought might answer, his mum. The reply came 15 minutes later. "Stop being dramatic. We're busy." That was who she was: always busy, always right. Too proud to listen, too distracted to notice her son slipping toward something fatal. Looking back, there were signs, years of them. The way Sarah smiled wider around strangers than she ever did at home. The way Greg's eyes glazed over whenever Eli spoke. The way Haley learned to cry on command, knowing it made her mother soften instantly. Eli had spent his whole life walking on glass, hoping not to be the reason someone else broke it. So when he begged for help that afternoon, when he whispered hospital through the pain, he wasn't surprised that no one listened, because in the Reed household, silence had always been the rule. He just never knew silence could nearly kill him. The pain had always been part of Eli's life in small ways, emotional bruises that faded but never really healed. But that day, sitting in the locked car outside Best Buy, pain became something else. Something alive. When Sarah and Greg disappeared into the store, the first few minutes stretched like hours. Eli tried to breathe through the ache, clawing at his abdomen, counting to 10, then 20, like he'd seen people do in those mindfulness videos his counselor once showed at school. It didn't work. Sweat dripped from his temples onto the seatbelt. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, the screen flickering from low battery. He tried to type, "help, hospital," but his fingers twitched, the letters blurring together. The sound of his pulse roared in his ears, drowning out everything else. He couldn't sit still. The seat felt too hot, the air too thin. His vision doubled. Streetlights smeared into white streaks through the window. Outside, the sun was sliding lower, washing the parking lot in pale gold. The world looked normal. That's what made it worse. Eli pressed his forehead against the window glass. The chill barely cut through the fever burning beneath his skin. He caught a glimpse of his mother comparing charges, lips pursed, expression flat with irritation. Beside her, Haley laughed at something on her phone. Greg stood with his hands in his pockets, checking his watch. They looked like any ordinary family, shopping before dinner, and Eli realized with a hollow, dizzy certainty that he could die right there, and they might not even notice. He gagged as nausea surged up his throat. The acid burned. He clutched his stomach tighter, curling over himself. A noise escaped him, half groan, half gasp. Then it happened. A white-hot explosion of pain, deep inside his lower abdomen, like a balloon snapping under pressure. The agony was instant, violent, unstoppable. His body seized. He couldn't scream, only choke on air. It felt like fire spreading through his veins, crawling up toward his chest. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He clawed at the seatbelt buckle, trying to get out, but his hand slipped. The edges of his vision darkened. Outside, Sarah turned just enough for their eyes to meet through the window. Her face didn't change. She looked at him, then turned back to the cashier. Something inside him broke that had nothing to do with his body. When the world flickered back into focus, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. A shadow moved outside the window. Greg, approaching the car, a plastic bag in hand. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Greg's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. Jesus, Eli, what the hell? Eli tried to speak, but no sound came out. His body trembled uncontrollably. Sarah. Greg's voice cracked through the air. Get over here. Moments later, Sarah appeared, clutching the charger box. Her face went pale, then hardened. Get him in the car, she said quickly. Now, Greg helped lift him, and the movement sent another wave of pain ripping through Eli's side. He screamed, then roared, involuntary, the sound scraping out of him like broken glass. Stop yelling, Sarah hissed, sliding into the passenger seat. You're scaring Haley. Haley was crying, phone clutched to her chest. Eli didn't care. The world was spinning. His vision kept dimming and brightening like a faulty light bulb. He tried to whisper again, hospital, but it came out as a rasp, barely audible. Greg sped out of the parking lot, tires screeching, the car filled with tension and silence, punctuated only by Haley's sobs. Sarah kept glancing back at Eli. You're fine, honey. It's probably just food poisoning. You always overreact. Her voice trembled, the edge between guilt and denial. Eli couldn't even answer. He felt detached, like watching from outside his own body. The buildings along the highway blurred together. At some point, he lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, harsh white light stabbed through his eyelids. The smell of antiseptic hit him first, sharp and clean. Machines beeped softly nearby. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed everything. Then the pain returned, dull but steady, banded around his stomach. He wasn't dead, not yet. He blinked until the room came into focus for line. Heart monitor. A nurse in dark blue scrubs, adjusting something beside him. The nurse noticed him stirring. Hey there, he said gently. The badge read Lucas Ramirez. You're awake. That's good. Eli tried to speak, but his throat was dry. What happened? Lucas hesitated. You're in the ICU, buddy. Your appendix ruptured. You got real sick, but you're stable now. Appendix. The word echoed like a gunshot through Eli's mind. He remembered the parking lot, his mother's face through the glass, the lock clicking shut. Lucas's expression softened as he saw the fear in Eli's eyes. You don't need to talk about it yet. Just rest. You're safe here. Safe. It felt like the first time anyone had said that word and meant it. Hours passed. The pain dulled to a heavy ache under the medication. Nurses moved quietly around him, adjusting tubes, checking vitals. Through the fog of fever, Eli heard voices in the hallway, his mother's, calm and performative. We came straight here as soon as we realized something was wrong, she told someone. We only stopped for 2 minutes. My daughter has anxiety, needed her medication. The nurse's voice replied, skeptical. I see. Eli closed his eyes. He wanted to scream that she was lying, that those 2 minutes had nearly killed him, but the weight of exhaustion pressed him down. He turned his head toward the dim glow of the hallway, and tears slipped silently down his cheeks, because even here in a hospital, full of strangers, he still wasn't sure if anyone truly saw him. When Lucas returned later that night, he checked Eli's fore and lingered. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. Do you feel safe at home? Eli hesitated. His throat burned. No. That single word hung between them, fragile but heavy with truth. Lucas nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Thank you for telling me. He squeezed Eli's hand once before leaving. We'll make sure you're okay. It was the first time in years someone had looked at him not with judgment, but with concern. Outside the ICU window, the night deepened. The world beyond the glass was quiet, streetlights glowing over empty parking lots. The city asleep. Inside, a boy lay still under the sterile light, realizing that the people who were supposed to protect him had almost destroyed him instead, and as the machines beside his bed kept him tethered to life, something inside him changed forever. Eli Reed stopped hoping his mother would save him. He decided he'd have to save himself. Hospitals were supposed to be safe, places bright, sterile, filled with people who fixed what was broken. But for Eli Reed, waking up there felt like entering another kind of battlefield. Their machines hummed softly beside his bed, a rhythmic beeping that matched the pulse in his wrist. Every breath still hurt, but not as sharp as before. He was alive, tethered by tubes and wires, the room filled with that cold lemon-scented air that only hospitals seem to have. He had no idea how long he'd been there when the door opened. Sarah stepped inside first, her heels clicking against the tile. Her hair was perfect, her blouse pressed like she'd come straight from a PTA meeting instead of nearly losing her son. Greg followed behind, holding a paper cup of coffee. Eli tensed. His throat felt raw. Double quotes. "Hey honey," Sarah said softly, her tone dripping with manufactured sweetness. "How are you feeling?" He didn't answer. Greg glanced at the monitors. "Doctors said you'll be fine. You scared your mum half to death." Eli blinked slowly. Half to death. The words made something twist inside him. Sarah moved closer, brushing his hair back. "You had us terrified, but thank God we got you here just in time." That sentence hit him harder than the pain. Just in time. He turned his head away, staring at the forebag. His lips parted, but only a whisper came out. "You left me in the car." Sarah's hand froze midair. A brief flicker crossed her face. Shock, then calculation. "Honey, no, that's not what happened. We ran in for a minute. You must have passed out before we got back." Her voice was calm, measured. The kind of voice people use when they're building a story they plan to tell more than once. Eli shook his head weakly. "It wasn't a minute. I was screaming." Sarah's tone sharpened. "Eli, enough. You were delirious. You don't remember clearly." Greg's eyes narrowed. "You should be grateful your mum acted fast. Some kids don't make it." Eli felt the room tilt. Gratitude for being abandoned. He wanted to scream, but the weight of their voices pressed him down. When a nurse entered a moment later, Sarah straightened, her expression melting back into concern. "We're just so relieved," she said to the nurse, voice trembling at all the right places. "It all happened so fast. I called 911 the second we noticed." The nurse nodded politely, jotting something on a chart. "Well, he's lucky you got him here when you did." Sarah smiled, tight and triumphant. Eli watched her realization creeping in like frost. She wasn't just lying, she was rewriting the truth. Later that afternoon, a social worker came by. Her badge read Angela Porter, and her tone was warm but deliberate. She asked gentle questions about school, about home, about what had happened that day. Before Eli could speak, Sarah jumped in. "It was a terrible misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We were shopping nearby when he got sick. We rushed right over. His dramatic sometimes gets that from his dad." Angela smiled politely. "I see, and you said he was in the car for how long?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. Greg nodded in agreement, arms crossed like a bodyguard. "That's it. He exaggerates things. Always has." Eli's pulse quickened, his stomach turned. Angela looked at him gently. "Eli, is that how you remember it?" He hesitated. The air felt heavy, his mother's stare slicing through him. If he said the truth, she'd make him pay for it later. He knew that look, the warning one, the same one she gave him before every lie she wanted him to agree with. He wanted to speak, but when his mouth opened, no sound came out. Finally, he nodded weakly. "Yeah," he whispered. 2 minutes. Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. "See, he just got scared. We're all fine now." Angela's eyes lingered on him a moment longer, as if she saw the fear behind the lie. She closed her notebook and said quietly, "I'll check in again tomorrow." When she left, Sarah leaned close. "You scared everyone half to death," she whispered. "Don't ever make me look like a bad mother again. Do you understand?" Eli stared at her, numb. For the first time, he truly understood the kind of woman his mother was. Not careless, not clueless, but calculating. Someone who cared more about how things looked than about whether her son survived them. The next day, more visitors came. Doctors, nurses, a teacher from school who'd heard what happened. Everyone praised Sarah for acting quickly. Each compliment landed like a bruise. She basked in it, telling the story again and again, each time polishing the details until she sounded like a hero. "He just collapsed," she'd say. "I don't even remember driving her. I was so scared." Greg would nod solemnly. She didn't stop crying the whole way. Eli lay there, silent. The truth felt heavy in his chest, pressing down on every breath. When Dylan, the only friend who'd ever known him well, texted, asking what happened, Eli typed out the truth. "They left me in the car. I almost died." Then he deleted it. He couldn't prove anything. Not yet. That night, the room was dim, except for the heart monitor's soft glow. Sarah had finally gone home. Greg had followed. For the first time since it all began, Eli was alone. Lucas, the nurse, came in quietly, checking his vitals. "How's the pain?" Eli hesitated. "Better," he murmured. Then, after a pause, they lied. Lucas met his eyes. "I know, he said simply. Eli blinked. You heard them. I've worked in this hospital for 12 years, Lucas said, voice calm but firm. I know when someone's protecting their reputation instead of their kid. Eli's throat tightened. No one believes me. Lucas adjusted the foreline and said softly, I do. That broke something open. Not the kind of break that hurts, but the kind that lets air in after being underwater too long for the first time in days. Eli let himself breathe fully. Outside, the hallway lights dimmed for the night. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped steadily, a reminder that life kept going even when it fell apart. Eli stared at the ceiling, feeling both smaller and stronger than ever before. He still didn't know what came next, what lies his mother would tell, what stories Greg would back up. But he knew one thing with painful clarity. If he wanted the truth to matter, he'd have to fight for it himself. When Eli woke the next morning, sunlight spilled through the hospital blinds, soft, forgiving, almost too gentle for what he felt inside. His body was weaker, but his mind sharper. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had just changed form. Now it was anger. Angela Porter returned that morning, clipboard in hand, smile, polite but unreadable. Sarah was already there, sitting by the bed, reading a magazine as if nothing had happened. Good morning, Angela said. Eli, how are you feeling today? Better, he murmured. Before he could say more, Sarah jumped in, voice full of concern. He's doing so much better. Thank God we're just relieved this whole nightmare's over. Angela nodded. That's wonderful to hear. Mind if I ask a few more questions? Sarah smiled sweetly. Of course, but Eli caught the shift in Angela's tone, quieter, more careful. This wasn't casual conversation. Angela turned to him. Eli, when we spoke yesterday, you said you might have been confused about how long you were in the car. Is that still how you remember it? The room went still. Sarah's hand tightened around the magazine. He was delirious, she said quickly. He doesn't remember things correctly. Angela's gaze didn't leave Eli. That's okay. Memory can be tricky, but sometimes it helps to talk through it again. You can tell me anything, okay? His pulse thudded in his ears. He looked at Sarah, her eyes sharp, warning him without a word. Then he remembered Lucas's voice from the night before. I believe you. He took a shaky breath. It wasn't 2 minutes, he said quietly. It was longer, way longer. Sarah's expression froze. Eli, he kept going, words trembling but steady. You locked the car. I was screaming. I saw you. You were at the counter. You looked right at me. Angela's pen paused mid-note. Sarah's smile fractured. Honey, no, that's not. He's confused, she said quickly. You don't know what you're saying. I do, Eli said louder. You didn't call anyone. Greg didn't even move until I passed out. For the first time, his mother had no script ready. Angela closed her notebook gently. Thank you, Eli, she said. That's really important. Sarah tried to laugh, strained and hollow. You can't seriously believe this. He's a teenager. They exaggerate. Angela stood. That's why we verify. We'll follow up with the hospital's intake report, surveillance footage, and emergency call logs. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Reed. And with that, she left calm, professional, but her eyes told Eli everything. She'd heard the truth, and she was going to check it. The next few days blurred into questions, paperwork, and quiet conversations Eli wasn't supposed to overhear. He learned things by accident, whispers between nurses, the tension in Sarah's tone when she stepped out to answer calls. Then one evening, Lucas came in, excitement flickering behind his calm. Hey, buddy, he said, checking the monitors. You're about to have a visitor who... Lucas smiled. Your dad. When Michael Carter walked in, Eli almost didn't recognize him. The last photo he'd seen was years old, a younger man, neat haircut, a little too tired. Now, Michael looked older, but his eyes were the same, warm, steady, real. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then Michael stepped forward and pulled him into a careful hug. Hey kiddo, he whispered. I'm here. Eli couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came quietly at first, then harder. She left me, he stammered. I know, his father said softly. Angela called me. She told me everything. Eli froze. You believe me? Michael's voice broke a little. I always would have. I just didn't know. That was all it took. Years of silence cracked open. The investigation moved fast after that. Angela had pulled security footage from the Best Buy parking lot, timestamps showing the SUV sitting still for nearly half an hour. No one went in or out. Emergency services confirmed that the 911 call came 27 minutes after Eli collapsed. The truth was in black and white. When the hospital's legal team reviewed the report, they contacted child services immediately. Sarah's 2-minute story crumbled under evidence. Greg tried to intervene. claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But the footage didn't lie. A meeting was scheduled in the hospital conference room. Eli sat beside Angela and his father, hands trembling under the table. Across from them sat Sarah and Greg, perfect posture, polite smiles, still pretending control. A representative from Child Protective Services read the report aloud. The patient was left unattended in a locked vehicle for approximately 28 minutes while experiencing acute medical distress. Sarah interrupted, voice breaking. I didn't mean to, Angela cut in gently. Intent doesn't change impact, Mrs. Reed. Your son could have died. Greg leaned forward. You're twisting it. She's a good mother. The boys emotionally always exaggerates. Eli's voice came out low but steady. You're lying. Greg turned toward him, stunned. Watch your tone. But Eli didn't back down. His hands were shaking, but his voice held. You both left me there. You made me feel like I was the problem. I almost died because of you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not guilt, but humiliation. Eli, please, don't do this. Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. He's already done it. The truth's out now. The silence that followed was heavy. Final dot. By the end of the week, the court granted temporary custody to Michael. Sarah was ordered into parental counseling and investigation. Greg's name disappeared from the emergency contact forms. Eli left the hospital 2 days later. Lucas walked him to the door, smiling proudly. Told you you'd get through this, he said. Eli grinned weakly. Couldn't have without you. Lucas shrugged. Nah, you did the hard part. You told the truth. That night, at his father's apartment, Eli stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. Everything felt new and fragile. The quiet, the safety, the possibility. Michael came up beside him. You know, he said softly, Angela told me something before I left the meeting. She said you were brave. Most adults wouldn't have spoken up like that. Eli looked out at the dark sky. I wasn't brave, he said. I was just tired of being scared. Michael smiled faintly. That's what bravery usually feels like. For the first time in years, Eli believed it. In the distance, the hum of traffic sounded like life moving forward. The pain was still there, but it wasn't everything anymore. He wasn't just the boy locked in the car. He was the boy who got out and made sure everyone saw what really happened, and that was the first victory that truly belonged to him. The night after the hearing, Eli slept deeper than he had in years. No nightmares, no doors slamming, no footsteps pacing the hallway outside his room. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, but safe. When he woke, sunlight spilled across the small apartment, his father's apartment now, but soon to be theirs. The faint smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. A pan sizzled softly. Michael was at the stove, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt humming off key. When he noticed Eli shuffling in, hair messy, still pale from the hospital, he smiled. Hey kiddo, you're up. Pancakes or eggs? Eli blinked, almost confused by the question. Pancakes. Good, Michael said, because I already messed up the eggs. It was such an ordinary moment, but it hit Eli harder than any grand gesture ever could. No shouting, no accusations, just breakfast. He sat at the table watching his dad flip pancakes unevenly. The plate that landed in front of him was slightly burnt on one side, but it was warm, real. You know, Michael said after a while, Angela called this morning. She wanted to check on you. Eli looked up. What did she say? That the investigation's closing soon. The court's finalizing full custody in my name. Sarah's going to therapy as part of her plea deal. Supervised visitation only. He let the words settle in. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was closure, the kind that didn't need an audience. Over the next few weeks, Eli began to rebuild what had been quietly broken for years. Michael enrolled him in a new school, closer to the apartment. The teachers were kind. The guidance counselor, a woman named Mrs. Grant, kept a bowl of jelly beans on her desk and a box of tissues within reach. You've been through a lot, she said during their first meeting. But you're here now. That means something. He nodded. Therapy became a weekly rhythm, too. The therapist, Dr. Patel, didn't ask him to forgive or forget. She just asked questions that made him breathe deeper than he had before. Sometimes, he talked. Sometimes, he didn't. But it was enough that someone listened. One afternoon, Dylan, the friend from the old neighborhood, showed up at the apartment door with a nervous smile. Hey, Dylan said. I heard you're back. Eli didn't know what to say at first. Then he laughed. Yeah, for good this time. They spent the rest of the day sitting on the curb outside, talking about nothing and everything. School, games, the weird smell of cafeteria, pizza. It felt almost like reclaiming a piece of the childhood he thought he'd lost. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to reach out. Letters came, written in perfect handwriting, every line carefully measured. I miss you. I didn't mean to hurt you. We can fix this someday. Eli read them once, then folded them neatly and put them away in a drawer. Maybe one day he'd answer, maybe not, but for now, he needed space that didn't echo with excuses. Greg didn't write at all, and that, somehow, was a gift. The first big milestone came 2 months later, his checkup appointment at the hospital. Walking through those sterile hallways again made his chest tighten, but Lucas was waiting by the nurse's station. Same calm smile, same steady eyes. Look at you, Lucas said. Standing tall again, Eli smiled. Yeah, trying to. Lucas nodded. You did more than that. You made people listen. They talked for a few minutes about recovery, about school, about how life could move forward. Before Eli left, Lucas handed him a small folded note. Inside were 5 words, written in neat, blocky handwriting. Never apologize for surviving. Eli kept it in his wallet. Spring arrived slowly that year, almost hesitant, as if testing whether it was safe to bloom again. Eli spent more time outside running, reading on park benches, helping Michael paint the living room. On weekends they'd drive out of town, no destination in mind, windows rolled down, classic rock humming through the speakers. Sometimes they talked about the past, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. One evening while cleaning up after dinner, Michael found Eli staring out the balcony window, watching the sunset bleed gold into the city skyline. What are you thinking about? He asked. Eli smiled faintly. Just everything. How weird it feels to be okay. Michael leaned against the railing beside him. You earned okay. Took a hell of a road to get here. Eli nodded slowly. Do you ever think people change? His father exhaled. Some do, some don't. But you did. That's what matters. Eli thought about Sarah, then her voice, her lies, her fear. Maybe one day she'd change. Maybe she wouldn't. But he no longer needed her to. He'd stopped waiting for her apology. The moment he realized he didn't owe her forgiveness. A few days later, Mrs. Grant called him into her office again. End of year essay assignment, she said with a grin. Topics, simple. What does family mean to you? You can write whatever you want. That night, Eli sat at his desk, pencil hovering over the page for a long time. Then he began to write. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when the world stops. It's the nurse who doesn't look away, the friend who still knocks on your door, the father who burns breakfast just to make you smile. He paused, smiling to himself. It's the people who hear you when everyone else calls you dramatic. Weeks later, his essay hung in the counselor's hallway, typed neatly under the school logo. Beneath it, a small sticky note in Mrs. Grant's handwriting read, Proud of you, Eli. And as he walked out into the spring air that afternoon, sunlight warm on his face, laughter from nearby students echoing across the courtyard, he realized something simple, something steady. The pain would always be part of his story, but it wasn't the whole story anymore. He wasn't the boy locked in the car. He was the boy who lived, who spoke, who was finally free. Spring faded gently into summer, and the days began to stretch longer, brighter, quieter. Eli Reed had learned to live without waiting for storms. The nightmares still came, sometimes flashes of locked doors, the echo of his own voice calling for help, but they no longer controlled him. He'd learned something powerful in the aftermath of everything. Pain doesn't vanish. It transforms. On the first day of June, he and his father drove back to the coast, just the two of them. The air smelled like salt and freedom, the radio playing old songs that neither of them knew the words to. They stopped at a pier and watched the water shimmer under the setting sun. Michael leaned on the railing beside him. You know, he said, a few years from now, this will all just be part of the story you tell. Not the part that defines you, just the part that proves you made it. Eli smiled faintly. You think so? I know so. They stood there for a while, saying nothing. The waves rolled in, steady and sure, like time itself was giving them permission to breathe again. For so long, Eli had thought survival meant pretending it hadn't hurt. Now he understood surviving meant remembering without letting it own you. In quiet moments, he sometimes wondered about his mother, whether therapy was helping, whether she missed him for real, or just missed control. He didn't hate her anymore. That emotion had burned out somewhere along the road, leaving behind only a faint, tired pity. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about freeing her. It was about freeing himself. By late summer, his life had become ordinary again, beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. He helped his dad paint the living room a brighter shade of blue. He started volunteering after school, helping younger kids with homework, and on weekends he'd ride his bike down long suburban streets. wind in his face, no destination, just motion, just life. There were still scars, physical and invisible, but they no longer felt like marks of weakness. They were proof that truth, once spoken, has power. One evening, Eli sat at his desk writing an email to Lucas, the nurse who had believed him first. He wrote, "Thank you for listening when no one else did. I think that saved my life." He stared at the words for a long moment before hitting send. Then he looked out the window, at the glow of the city lights. For the first time, the future didn't scare him. It called to him. Some stories end with a bang, others with silence. Eli's ended with something in between, a deep breath. A sunrise, the kind of peace that comes only after you've survived. Yourself, the boy who once whispered for help from the back seat of a locked car, had become the young man who could speak his truth out loud. Maybe that's the real definition of justice, not punishment, not revenge, but the courage to say, "This happened, and I'm still here." Because justice isn't always handed down in courtrooms. Sometimes, it's found in quiet kitchens, over burnt pancakes, in the steady voice of someone who finally listens. Sometimes, it's simply waking up one day and realizing that you made it out, and that you're never going back. So, what do you think? Do you believe someone still deserves to be called a parent if they abandon their child when that child needs them most? If you believe that everyone deserves to be loved, protected, and heard, leave a comment below, and follow this channel for more stories that remind us, sometimes, survival is justice. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Every view, every comment, every moment you spend listening, it means more than you think. These stories aren't just fiction. They're reflections of what many people quietly go through every day. And sometimes, hearing one voice speak the truth can help someone else find theirs. If this story touched you, or made you think about what love, family, and justice really mean, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today, because together, we can build a space where every story and every voice matters. Thank you for watching. And remember, truth may hurt, but silence hurts even more. Follow for more stories that remind us sometimes, survival is justice.